have you represented that have received the death penalty? Or how, I phrased that wrong. How many people have you represented that got the death penalty? And are any of them, none of them are drug cases, right?
No. Yeah, the death penalty is only if you committed murder. So currently, I have less than a handful of individuals who are on death row who were sentenced to death that I represented.
A handful.
Yeah, less than 5.
Less than 5.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those people do you believe were either not guilty or innocent or were wrongly convicted? I mean, obviously you're the attorney, so you probably believe all of them were wrongly convicted because you represented them. But do you think there's any of them that were innocent or not guilty?
I've had clients who were sentenced to death that I believed were innocent. Fortunately, they have been vindicated in the appellate process, so they're no longer on death row, no longer in prison.
They walked free?
Correct. The ones that I have there now, I mean, because they're on death row and because their sentences are still being appealed and what have you, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk about the specifics of their cases.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there's no doubt that innocent people are convicted. There's no doubt that people have been sentenced to death and then been vindicated through DNA evidence or otherwise. The sad thing about, so I can think of 2 people in particular that I represented who basically had their convictions vacated by the Supreme Court. And it was based on a rule that basically said that if we're people that are charged with a crime are presumed innocent, and so if there was a reasonable hypothesis of innocence that I had argued, right, a reasonable scenario that would be consistent with innocence and inconsistent with guilt, and the evidence did not rebut that, right? So it's here's a scenario that we're saying this is what happened, and the evidence doesn't rebut that. The law basically, in the circumstantial evidence case, if the jury found the person guilty, would basically say the evidence is insufficient, and so therefore they had to be set free. That particular provision has changed, and so both of the individuals that I can think of that I represented who were set free, who were released from death row, under the current law today would not be released.
Really?
Right. Because they changed the circumstantial evidence rule.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just because there's a reasonable hypothesis that's not been rebutted, if the evidence is otherwise, compelling enough as to guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, they're basically saying we're not gonna change the verdict.
Why would they change a law like that?
I think it's crazy. I think it's sad. It's crazy. It makes no sense to me. But
why? Like who?
Because politicians feel like people are getting off for stuff they shouldn't get off for. Like,
you think they're winning votes by doing that?
Yeah, probably. I mean, their argument's going to be that guilty people are walking because of this. Instead of protecting the innocent, it's letting guilty people walk.
Mm.
And I mean, one of the questions that's been raised, throughout the time that I've been here, and I'm sure you've heard it before, is whether or not it's better that 10 guilty people, go free in order to protect one innocent person. And in my opinion, it's always better that 10 guilty people walk free if it's going to protect that one innocent person, right? Mm. And so that's the balancing act, right? And so their argument is that no, there's too many guilty people walking free, so we want to tighten up the laws and not, allow that escape valve to be present.
It's insane to think that guilty people could walk free from death row. It really is crazy.
The standard of proof is high, right? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So, I guess it's scary to think that people would be sentenced to death row to begin with, right?
Right.
But we make mistakes. We and that's why we have to have that's why we need all the protections to make sure that if we do make a mistake, that hopefully it will be uncovered and the person will be released and not executed.
What happens to somebody once they're on death row and they're fully exonerated? Oh, by the way, I wanted to bring up that stat that I'd mentioned to you before. I saw that Florida leads the country in death row exonerations.
Right. Right.
So that means more people are let free because they were wrongly convicted when they were on death row than any
other state
in the country.
Right.
That's wild.
Yeah. No, it's scary. The sad thing about when people are generally people who are charged with murder, are incarcerated for the whole time period that their case is pending trial, right? And then if they're convicted and sentenced to death, they're going to be in prison on death row for many years, usually before they're set free either by the Supreme Court on direct appeal or in post-conviction hearings later on.
Mm-hmm.
And we're terrible about compensating or helping those people out when their cases are reversed. So when it's determined that the person should not be on death row, that the person is most likely innocent, and the person gets a new trial and is released and
mm-hmm.
what have you.
Mm-hmm.
There's no compensation. So you can spend 20, 30 years in jail or prison, and there's no mechanism to there is a mechanism, but it's extremely limited. So basically the burden then is on the person who has been released to prove that he was actually innocent and that they were aware of evidence of his actual innocence at the time. It's
so that the prosecutors were aware of the evidence but
law
withheld
enforcement and prosecutors, right?
And that's the process. They have to do that in order to be paid once they're released.
Right, which is next to impossible.
Really?
Yeah. Have
you ever heard of them
happens.
Getting paid?
Yeah, I've heard of people getting paid, but it's
what kind
the
of money?
exception and not the rule. Some people have received significant sums, ranging from maybe 100,000 into the millions, but it's the exception, not the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, if you've been wrongfully convicted and served years in custody, we should be helping those people out to get back on their feet, to be able to have a chance of being a law-abiding citizen, right?
Right. And the question is, how much is enough?
Right.
Well, I think the best answer to that is ask the person who put him in jail how much would be enough for you to do 20 years.
Right.
Right. With $2 million, would you like to do 20? Would you be willing to go to prison for 20 years for $2 million?
No, of course not.
I don't think anybody would.
No. But we don't want to spend money on that.